The Cerilith station floated like a black crown above the dying red star. Its metal rings turned slowly, glowing faintly against the endless night. Human ships had docked there for the first time in history. For decades, Cerilith and humans had fought in cold silence, neither trusting the other. But now, after years of small talks and broken truces, they had finally agreed to meet face to face. Commander Elias Grant walked through the silver corridor of the station, his boots echoing on the floor. He wore the dark uniform of the Terran Union, his shoulders straight, his face calm. He was tall, with steady eyes that made people feel safe, though he did not think of himself as special. He had been chosen for this mission because he was patient, because he did not lose his temper easily, and because he understood how words could sometimes win where weapons failed. Two Cerilith guards walked beside him. Their armor gleamed with sharp edges, and their strange scaled skin shone beneath the lights. The Cerilith were known as fierce warriors, taller and stronger than humans. They never smiled, never laughed, never showed softness. To them, honor was sharper than any blade. The door at the end of the hall opened, and Elias stepped into the council chamber. It was a large circular room with high ceilings and banners of black and silver hanging down. The Cerilith council members sat in tall chairs shaped like thrones. At the center, on a smaller seat, was Princess Lyra. She was younger than Elias expected, perhaps the human equivalent of 20 years. Her dark hair flowed over her shoulders, and her pale silver eyes looked sharp, almost cold. But there was also curiosity in her gaze, as if she was studying every detail of the human who had dared to come here. Elias bowed slightly, as human custom demanded. "Honored Council, Princess Lyra, I come as a messenger of peace from Earth." The chamber was quiet. The Cerilith High King was not present, only his daughter and counselors. They wanted to test the human first, to see if he was worth their time. Lyra's voice was calm when she spoke. "Humans talk of peace, yet your history shows war. Why should the Cerilith listen to you now?" Elias had expected the question. He kept his tone even, because war has taken enough from both of us. Peace does not mean forgetting the past. It means choosing to survive the future. The counselors whispered among themselves. Lyra's eyes never left his face. She was looking for weakness, some sign of fear. But Elias did not flinch. The talks continued for some time, formal and heavy. Words about treaties, trade, and borders filled the chamber. But the air remained stiff, and the distance between human and Cerilith hearts stayed wide. Elias felt the tension pressing down like stone. He knew he needed to break it somehow. At one point, Lyra asked him about Earth's leadership. Elias leaned back slightly and smiled. On Earth, leaders are chosen by people, not by bloodlines. Though, he added lightly, if we had a princess like you, maybe the people would not mind a crown again. The room fell silent. The Cerilith guards stiffened. To speak so casually, almost playfully, was unusual in their strict culture. Elias noticed the flicker of confusion in their eyes. But then he saw something he had never expected. Lyra's cheeks warmed with faint color. It was small, but it was clear. She was blushing. Elias tilted his head, amused by her reaction. "Forgive me, sweetheart. I meant no disrespect." The word slipped out naturally, the way humans often spoke to someone with kindness. He did not plan it. He simply said it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The counselors looked shocked. The guards tightened their grips on their weapons. Cerilith culture did not use such words. Their language had no place for tenderness in public speech. To call their princess something so soft, so human, was unthinkable, and yet, Lyra did not lash out. She did not command his arrest. Instead, her silver eyes widened slightly, and she looked down for just a second. The warmth on her face deepened. The Cerilith princess was blushing again. Elias blinked. He had not expected that. He had expected anger or cold rejection. But the sight of her reaction made something stir in his chest. Lyra quickly straightened herself, her voice firm again. "Your words are strange, Commander. Humans speak with colors the Cerilith do not use." Elias smiled softly. "Maybe it is time you learn those colors. Maybe that is how peace begins." For the rest of the session, the tone changed. It was subtle but real. The counselors still spoke of treaties, of trade, of old wounds. But Lyra's eyes returned to Elias again and again, as if she was no longer only listening to his words, but trying to understand him. When the meeting ended, Elias was escorted to his guest quarters. The guards left him alone in the quiet room. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands together, thinking about what had just happened. He had called a Seralith princess sweetheart. He had broken every rule of protocol in the book. And yet she had not punished him. She had blushed. Somewhere deep inside, Elias felt this was not the end. Something had shifted. A door had opened between two worlds that had never dared to touch. Meanwhile, in her private chamber, Princess Lyra sat in silence. Her hand touched her cheek, remembering the warmth that had risen there. The word echoed in her mind, soft and strange. Sweetheart. No Seralith had ever spoken to her that way. Among her people, affection was weakness. But when Elias said it, it did not feel like weakness. It felt like something else. Something she did not have a word for. And though she would never admit it aloud, she wanted to hear him say it again. The next day on the Seralith station began with silence. The corridors were always quiet, but for Elias the silence felt different now. He kept remembering the moment in the council chamber, the word that had slipped out of his mouth and the way Princess Lyra had blushed. He had spoken without thinking, just trying to lighten the tension. Yet somehow that single word had done what hours of formal talk could not. It had broken through the cold wall around her. Elias wondered if she would even acknowledge it again, or if she would pretend it never happened. As he sat in his quarters reading the official reports, a soft knock came at the door. The Seralith guards rarely knocked. They usually announced themselves with a command. Elias opened the door, and to his surprise it was Lyra. She wore a simple dark robe instead of her ceremonial armor, and without the heavy crown of silver metal, she looked younger, less distant. Her silver eyes studied him quietly. "Commander," she said, her voice calm but not cold. "May I enter?" Elias stepped aside. "Of course, Princess." She walked inside and stood near the desk, her hands folded neatly. For a long moment she said nothing, as if she was deciding whether to speak. Elias waited patiently. He knew enough not to push. Finally, she looked at him and asked, "That word you spoke yesterday, what does it mean?" Elias smiled faintly. He had expected this. "Sweetheart?" Her cheeks warmed just slightly, though her face stayed serious. "Yes, that one. I do not understand it. In our language, there is no such word. It was not an insult, was it?" Elias shook his head gently. "No, Princess. It was not an insult. On Earth, we sometimes use little words like that to show care. It is a kind way to speak, not meant to hurt, only to comfort." Lyra tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Care, you mean affection?" "Attachment." "Yes," Elias said softly. "It can mean someone you value, someone you want to protect, someone close to your heart." She lowered her gaze for a moment, her fingers tightening around the folds of her robe. "Strange. Among my people, words like that do not exist. We show respect through honor. We show loyalty through action. But we do not soften our speech. That might be why it surprised you," Elias said with a small smile. "Sometimes words can carry strength too, just a different kind. Humans use them to remind each other they are not alone." Lyra's eyes lifted to his face again. "Say it once more." Elias blinked but then nodded. His voice was calm, steady as he repeated, "Sweetheart." The sound filled the room. Lyra's lips pressed together and she drew in a slow breath. For reasons she could not explain, the word warmed her chest. She had faced battles, led warriors, and trained in the arts of war. Yet never had a single sound made her feel like this, both fragile and strong at the same time. "Why does it feel like this?" she asked softly, almost to herself. "It should mean nothing to me." "Because it is new," Elias said. "Because no one has ever spoken to you that way before. Sometimes new things feel strange, but that doesn't make them wrong." Lyra turned slightly, walking to the window where the dying red star glowed beyond the glass. "If the council knew I asked you this, they would call it weakness. They would say I am letting the human change me." Elias stood beside her, though he kept a respectful distance. "Maybe change is what your people need. Maybe it's what both our people need." For a moment silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Lyra's eyes stayed on the star. Elias watched her, noticing that for all her strength there was a hidden loneliness in her posture. She carried burdens no one had lifted for her. Then she turned to him suddenly. "Tell me about Earth, not the politics, not the treaties. Tell me about how humans live." Elias smiled, glad for the shift. "Earth is many things. Loud cities full of lights, quiet villages where people grow food, mountains taller than the clouds, and oceans that cover most of the planet. Humans are not always wise, but they are curious. They create songs, paintings, stories. They argue, they forgive, they fall in love. Life is messy, but it is full of color. Lyra listened carefully as if every word was a new discovery. You speak of art and love as if they are as important as strength and war. They are, Elias said firmly. They give us reasons to survive the battles. Without them, victory means nothing. Her eyes softened just slightly. She had never heard anyone speak that way before. Among the Seralith, strength was survival. Feelings were hidden, considered dangerous. Yet this human spoke of them as treasures, not weaknesses. Before she could reply, the door chimed. One of her guards entered quickly, bowing. Princess, the council requests your presence. The negotiations resume. Lyra straightened, her mask of calm returning. I will come. She turned back to Elias, and for just a heartbeat her voice softened. Thank you for explaining. Then she left, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts. The second round of negotiations was even more tense than the first. The counselors argued about borders, resources, and old wounds. They distrusted humans deeply, and every word felt like a test. But Elias noticed something different now. Each time Lyra spoke, her eyes flickered toward him as if measuring his reaction. And when Elias spoke of cooperation and trust, she did not interrupt or challenge him as sharply as before. Her silence felt like support. The counselors saw it too. Whispers passed through the chamber. The human and the princess were watching each other too closely. It was dangerous. After hours of debate, the session ended. Elias returned to his quarters again, tired but steady. He expected nothing more for the day, but late in the night the door opened quietly. Lyra stepped inside once more, her robe flowing in the dim light. Princess? Elias asked in surprise. I should not be here, she admitted. But I needed to ask you again, that word. When you say it, I feel something I cannot name. Say it again. Elias hesitated, then whispered gently. Sweetheart? Lyra's heart gave a strange, unsteady beat. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever dared. When she opened her eyes, her voice was quiet but firm. Do not stop saying it, even if others would not understand. Elias nodded. Then I won't stop. For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. It was small, almost hidden, but it was real. And Elias knew in that moment that something powerful was beginning. Something far more dangerous than war and far more hopeful than peace. The bond between them had been born. The Seralith station slept under the shadow of the dying star. Its metal rings turned slowly in the silence of space, but inside, the tension between humans and Seralith grew heavier each day. The councils debated, the leaders argued, and while words filled the halls, something else crept closer, something none of them expected. Commander Elias Grant felt it first, not as proof, but as instinct. He had been a soldier before he became a diplomat. His years of service had taught him how to feel danger, even when it hid behind smiles and silence. Something in the air was wrong. The corridors felt too quiet. The guards seemed restless, and in the distance he sometimes thought he saw shadows moving where no one should be. But his mind often returned to Princess Lyra. Since that night when she had come to him again, asking him to say the word that unsettled her heart, their bond had grown quietly. They did not meet in front of the council, but in the hours between duty, Lyra found reasons to ask him questions about Earth. Sometimes she asked about human art, sometimes about families, sometimes about love. Elias answered with patience, never mocking her curiosity. In return, she told him about the Seralith, how children were trained from birth in discipline, how families rarely spoke of affection, how even laughter was seen as a distraction. Her voice carried no bitterness, only truth. But Elias could see that each time she asked him to repeat sweetheart, she was reaching for something her own world had denied her. One evening, as they walked together along a high corridor with a view of the red star, Lyra's expression turned troubled. My father will arrive soon, she said softly. The High King does not trust humans. If he sees how often I speak with you. Elias understood. Then we'll be careful. You are his daughter first, a princess before anything else. She looked at him, her silver eyes steady. And yet when you call me sweetheart, I do not feel like a princess. I feel like myself. That is dangerous. Before Elias could reply, the station shook with a sudden tremor. The lights flickered. An alarm echoed through the halls, sharp and loud. Lyra straightened instantly, her warrior training rising. "What was that?" she demanded. Elias was already moving toward the nearest console. The screen lit up with warnings. Unauthorized ships had entered the system. Not Seralith ships, not human ships, someone else. A voice came through the station's comms, sharp with panic. "Unknown fleet approaching. Weapons locked." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "The Dravari," she whispered. Elias had heard of them. The Dravari were an empire that thrived on conflict. If peace ever formed between humans and Seralith, the Dravari would lose their advantage. They had no desire for unity, only endless war. "We have to get to the command deck," Elias said firmly. Lyra nodded, and together they ran through the corridors. Guards joined them, weapons ready. The air shook again as explosions rocked the station. The Dravari had begun their attack. The command deck was chaos. Officers shouted orders, alarms blared, and screens showed the enemy fleet drawing closer. Sleek black ships, sharp as blades, fired streams of light across the void. Lyra stepped forward, her voice commanding. "Form defensive lines. Shield the core. Do not let them breach the inner ring." Her people obeyed instantly, moving with military precision. Elias stood beside her, scanning the screens. "They'll try to cut you off from your defenses," he warned. "They want the Seralith to look weak in front of the humans. If your people fall here, peace will be broken before it begins." Lyra turned to him. "Then fight with us. Show my people what a human can do." Elias nodded. He may have come as a diplomat, but he had not forgotten how to fight. The next hours blurred into battle. The station shook under enemy fire. Seralith warriors in silver armor rushed through the halls, blades glowing, guns firing. Elias joined them, not with the same strength, but with speed and cleverness. He ducked under enemy strikes, used quick shots to disable weapons, and shouted warnings that saved lives. Lyra fought beside him, swift and precise. Her blade cut through Dravari soldiers with deadly grace. Yet even in the chaos, her eyes often flicked toward Elias, checking if he still stood. And when fear threatened to rise inside her chest as explosions roared too close, she heard his voice over the comms. "Hold steady, sweetheart. You've got this." The word struck her harder than the sound of battle. For a moment, her fear turned to fire, her body moving with renewed strength. She did not know why a single human word could give her such power, but it did. Together, they pushed forward, forcing the Dravari back step by step. But the enemy was cunning. Small groups broke into the inner corridors, trying to reach the station's power core. If they destroyed it, the entire place would collapse. "We can't let them near the core," Elias shouted. Lyra nodded. "Come with me. We end this now." The fight in the inner ring was fierce. The halls were narrow, filled with smoke and sparks from broken lights. Dravari soldiers charged with cruel precision, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Elias fought with everything he had, his blaster quick, his fists steady. He was not as strong as the Seralith, but he adapted faster, using the environment, pushing crates, triggering doors to trap enemies. Lyra noticed his creativity and admired it silently. At one point, a Dravari warrior broke through, swinging a heavy blade toward Lyra. She stumbled, her guard broken. Elias reacted without thought, throwing himself between them. The blade scraped his arm, but he fired his blaster point blank, dropping the enemy. "Are you hurt?" Lyra demanded, pulling him back. "Just a scratch," Elias said, though pain burned through his sleeve. He forced a grin. "Told you, sweetheart, I'm not so easy to kill." Her heart tightened at the word. She wanted to tell him not to waste himself for her, but the battle gave no time. With one final push, they reached the core chamber. The last group of Dravari tried to plant explosives, but Elias and Lyra struck first. She cut them down with swift strikes while Elias disarmed the charges, tossing them aside. When the smoke cleared, the chamber stood safe. The battle was won. When the alarms finally silenced, the station lay scarred but standing. The Dravari ships retreated into the void, unwilling to lose more. The Seralith had survived. On the command deck, cheers rose from the warriors. But not all were cheering. Some looked at Lyra and Elias, whispering among themselves. They had seen how often the princess fought beside the human, how she looked at him, how his words seemed to steady her more than their own. Elias noticed the whispers but said nothing. He stood at Lyra's side, his arm bandaged, his uniform marked with smoke. Lyra's voice rang across the chamber. "The Seralith do not stand alone. Today we fought not as enemies of humans, but as allies. Remember that." Her counselors bowed, though uneasily. When the room began to clear, Elias leaned closer and spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "You were incredible out there." Lyra's lips pressed together, her eyes softer than before. "I only stood because you steadied me. When you called me sweetheart, I did not feel fear." "I felt strong," Elias smiled gently. "Then I'll keep saying it as long as you need." For the first time in her life, Princess Lyra wished her people understood what she was feeling. But they could never know. For now it was hers and Elias's secret. And though the battle was over, both of them knew the true fight was just beginning. The battle against the Dravari had ended, but the Seralith station still carried scars. Smoke hung in some corridors, repair crews moved quickly, and the warriors spoke in low voices about the strange night when humans and Seralith had fought together. Commander Elias Grant walked through the halls with his arm bandaged. The wound from the blade had been shallow, but it reminded him of how close he had come to death. Still, what stayed in his mind most was the look on Princess Lyra's face during the battle. Not fear, not anger, something different, something warmer. But there was no time for quiet thoughts. News spread fast. The Seralith High King had arrived. His warship, larger than any other, had docked with the station that morning. His presence meant judgment. He would want answers about the attack, about the humans, and about his daughter. The council chamber was filled with heavy silence. The High King sat at the tallest throne, his armor black with lines of silver, his crown shaped like blades. His eyes were cold, sharp, and heavy with command. Elias entered with a small group of human officers, bowing respectfully. He had faced many leaders, but none like this one. The High King's presence was like a storm, crushing and powerful. Princess Lyra stood beside her father, her posture tall, but Elias could see the tension in her shoulders. She avoided his eyes in front of the council, though he knew her thoughts were not far from him. The High King's voice echoed through the chamber. "My daughter tells me you fought well in the battle, that you stood by her side. Is this true, human?" Elias kept his tone steady. "It is true. The Dravari would have destroyed the station. We fought together to stop them." The king's eyes narrowed. "And yet I hear whispers that you speak to my daughter with strange words, that she listens to you more closely than she should. Tell me, human, what are your intentions?" The counselors leaned forward, waiting. The air was thick with judgment. Elias knew any wrong word could destroy the fragile trust between their peoples. "I came here for peace," Elias said firmly. "Nothing more. But in the battle, Princess Lyra and I learned to trust each other. That is not weakness. That is strength." The king's expression darkened. "The Seralith do not need human softness to survive. We need discipline, honor, and fire." He turned sharply to Lyra. "And you, daughter, have you forgotten this?" Lyra straightened. Her voice was calm, but Elias could hear the faint tremor beneath. "No, father. I have not forgotten. But I have also seen that humans fight with something different. They protect not only with blades, but with heart. Elias stood with me even when it cost him blood. That is not weakness." The council chamber erupted in whispers. To defend a human in front of her father was bold, dangerous. The High King's gaze burned into her. "Do you dare place the word of a human above the command of your people?" Lyra held her ground, though her hands clenched tightly at her sides. "I place truth where it belongs. Without him, I would not stand here today. That is no shame to admit." The king's silence was heavy, but then he raised his hand, cutting off the whispers. "Enough, the Dravari still threaten us. If this human claims he can fight for peace, then let him prove it." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Elias. "We face another assault soon. Scouts report a larger Dravari fleet gathering near the star. If you, human, can lead a strategy to defend this station, then perhaps I will listen. If not, your presence here will end." That night, Elias studied the tactical maps in his quarters. The Dravari fleet was massive. If they struck with full force, the Seralith station could fall. The Seralith fought with courage, but their tactics were rigid. The Dravari would exploit that. A knock sounded. Elias looked up as Lyra entered quietly. She closed the door behind her, her face troubled. "My father tests you," she said softly. "If you fail, peace fails with you. He will never trust humans again." Elias nodded. "I know. That's why we can't rely only on strength. We need to outthink them. The Dravari expect us to fight head-on, but if we use the station's rings and hidden tunnels, we can trap them." Lyra listened closely, her eyes shining faintly in the dim light. Your mind works differently. Our people would never think to use the station itself as a weapon. That's why we need each other, Elias said. Your people bring strength. Mine bring flexibility. Together it works. Silence stretched for a moment. Then Lyra stepped closer. Her voice lowered. Elias, my father will never accept weakness from me. If he learns how much I value your words, he will call it betrayal. Elias looked at her carefully. And what do you believe, Lyra? Is it betrayal to want something more than war? Her chest tightened. She thought of the countless years of training, of the cold halls where no one ever called her anything but princess or commander. And then she thought of one single word, spoken softly, that gave her courage in the middle of fire. She whispered, almost trembling, say it again. Elias's voice was steady. Sweetheart. The word wrapped around her like a shield. For a moment she closed her eyes, breathing it in. When she opened them, there was a spark of strength in her silver gaze. I will stand with you tomorrow, she said, even if it means standing against my father's will. The next day the Dravari returned. Their fleet blackened the stars, a swarm of sharp ships moving like wolves. The station shook as the first shot struck its shields. On the command deck, chaos erupted. The High King barked orders, the council shouted, and warriors rushed to their posts. Elias stepped forward. Let me lead the defense. The king glared at him, but Lyra's voice cut through the noise. Father, trust him. His plan will save us. The king hesitated, then finally gave a sharp nod. Then show us, human. Prove your worth. Elias quickly outlined his strategy. Instead of meeting the Dravari head-on, they would lure them into the outer rings of the station. Hidden charges would collapse sections of the ring, forcing the Dravari into narrow paths where Seralith warriors could strike with precision. Human officers coordinated with Seralith captains, their voices weaving together in a rare harmony. The battle began. Explosions tore through the black. The Dravari advanced, confident, but then the trap snapped shut. Parts of the station broke away, spinning into space, cutting off enemy ships. Seralith fighters surged forward, striking from hidden angles. Lyra fought at the front, her blade flashing. Elias guided the operation from the deck, his voice calm and commanding. Every time the battle wavered, he called out steady words, words that reached even Lyra through the storm. You're not alone, sweetheart. Hold the line. And every time she heard it, her heart steadied. She struck harder, faster, carrying her people forward. Hours later, the Dravari fleet broke. Their ships fled into the dark, unwilling to lose more. The station still stood. When the chamber quieted again, the High King rose from his throne. His voice was heavy but thoughtful. You fought with honor, human. You brought victory where I doubted. For that I give you respect. Elias bowed slightly. Thank you, High King, but the victory was not mine alone. It was ours. The king's eyes lingered on Lyra, then on Elias again. His tone darkened. Respect is not trust. Do not forget that. My daughter is Seralith. She belongs to her people. Lyra's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Elias only bowed again, hiding the storm inside him. When the council ended, Lyra found Elias alone in the quiet corridor. For a moment they said nothing. Then she whispered, He will never accept us. Not truly. Elias looked at her, his voice steady. Then we'll make our own path. Together. Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time in her life, she let herself believe that such a path might exist. But in her heart, she knew the hardest choice was yet to come. The Seralith station floated quietly in the black expanse of space, but the calm was only temporary. Though the Dravari had retreated, their threat still loomed, and the council warned that another attack could come at any time. Princess Lyra walked through the corridors, her mind heavy with both relief and doubt. The battle had proven humans could fight alongside Seralith, but her father's judgment still hung over her like a shadow. Trust in the eyes of her people was earned only by blood and steel, and yet she had seen something different in Elias Grant. Elias moved quietly beside her, carrying the reports from the command deck. The last days had forged a bond between them stronger than words could explain. But stronger still were the unspoken truths. Lyra had begun to see the world differently, a place where courage was not only in strength but in choice, where heart mattered as much as skill. Princess, Elias said softly, we need to prepare the station. If the Dravari return, they will come with everything they have. Lyra nodded, her silver eyes scanning the dark halls. I know, but Father will not let me fight freely. He will insist on orders I do not agree with. Elias put a hand gently on her shoulder. Then we fight carefully together, and we show them that humans and Seralith can be allies in ways no one has imagined. She looked at him, her heart tightening. Even if it costs us? Even if it costs us, Elias said. The council gathered in the command chamber once more. The High King arrived, his armor gleaming under the dim lights, his eyes sharper than ever. He looked at Elias with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. The Dravari are massing once again, the king announced. I will allow humans to participate in the defense. But remember this, my daughter is Seralith. Her loyalty is first to her people. Lyra stood beside her father, her expression firm. She did not flinch. My loyalty has not changed. But the truth is, human and Seralith together are stronger than either alone. The council murmured. Some were uneasy, but the king remained silent, weighing her words. Elias stepped forward. High King, I have devised a plan to use the station's outer rings to trap the Dravari fleet. If we coordinate human and Seralith forces, we can protect the station and drive them away, but we must act quickly. The High King's gaze lingered. Finally he nodded. Then prove your worth, human. The station and my daughter depend on you. The next hours were a flurry of action. Seralith warriors prepared weapons, reinforced shields, and positioned themselves at key points in the outer rings. Human engineers coordinated with Seralith officers, setting traps and guiding patrols. Lyra and Elias moved together through the halls, side by side, their hands brushing occasionally as they passed orders. The bond between them had grown quiet but undeniable. Each glance, each word, each movement carried trust that no one else in the room understood. When the Dravari fleet arrived, it was larger than ever. Hundreds of black ships filled the void, glowing faintly with the energy of their weapons. The station shook as the first volleys struck shields, but the humans and Seralith held steady. Stay calm, Elias called over the comms. Follow the plan. Trust your instincts. Lyra gripped her blade. And trust yourself, she added, remembering his words from the night before. The battle raged, fierce and loud. Dravari fighters tried to breach the station's inner rings, but the traps worked perfectly. Sections of the outer rings collapsed, forcing enemy ships into narrow corridors where Seralith warriors struck with deadly precision. Human soldiers coordinated with them, guiding their movements, pointing out weak points, and providing cover fire. Amid the chaos, Lyra found herself surrounded by enemy fighters. She fought with skill, but fatigue threatened to slow her movements. Then she heard his voice, calm yet firm. Sweetheart, keep going. You've got this. Her chest tightened at the sound of that single word. Fear melted into strength. She moved faster, struck harder, and cleared the attackers with precise skill. Every time she heard him call her that, her resolve deepened. Elias was everywhere at once, moving through the chaos, his commands saving lives, his calm presence guiding the station's defense. Though weaker than the Seralith physically, his ingenuity and courage proved unmatched. Together they were unstoppable. Hours passed. The Dravari fleet began to falter, their formations breaking under coordinated human Seralith attacks. The station had survived, and the Dravari ships fled into the void, unwilling to lose more soldiers. The alarms finally fell silent. On the command deck, exhausted warriors cheered. The battle was over. The station still stood. Lyra lowered her blade, her chest heaving. She looked around and finally saw Elias, his uniform scorched in places, his arm bandaged, but his eyes bright and steady. Relief and admiration flooded her. You were incredible, she said softly. He shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. No, you were incredible. I only helped. She took a step closer, her voice almost a whisper. Do you know why I fought so hard? Not because of my father, not because of duty, but because I wanted to survive for you. Your words, your presence. It gave me courage when I thought I had none. Elias's eyes softened. He reached out gently. Lyra, you've always had courage. You just never let yourself feel it fully. That word, it's just a reminder. That's all. Lyra's cheeks warmed, a blush rising that she could not hide. Say it again, she whispered. Elias's voice was calm, steady, full of meaning. Sweetheart. Her lips pressed together and she drew a slow breath. For a moment, nothing else existed. No counsel, no battles, no expectations. Just that word, just them, and the warmth it carried. Then keep saying it, she said softly, almost laughing. Forever. Elias smiled, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. Forever, he agreed. For the first time in her life, Princess Lyra felt truly free, not as a Seralith princess, not as a warrior bound by rules, but as herself. And for the first time, Elias felt the same. Not as a human diplomat, not as a soldier, but as someone who had found a bond that crossed worlds. The council would talk. The High King would frown. The whispers would never end. But none of that mattered now. The station had survived. Their people had survived. And they had each other. In the quiet aftermath, Lyra and Elias walked through the corridors of the station side by side. The red star outside glowed faintly, painting their faces in soft light. They spoke little, but every glance, every touch, every word carried meaning. When the human and Seralith officers saw them, they understood something new. Strength was not only in weapons, nor honor only in tradition. It was also in trust, in courage, and in the small. Human words that could light a fire stronger than any blade. And as the stars stretched into the endless night, Princess Lyra whispered once more, just for herself. Just for him. Say it again. Elias smiled.
Sweetheart. And the word echoed through the quiet halls, a promise, a bond, and a beginning.